Oil prices just recorded their biggest weekly surge in the entire history of futures trading. Bigger than the Gulf War, bigger than September 11th, bigger than anything since the modern oil market was born in 1983. In 1 week. And the reason is a war that the United States government launched just 9 days ago. A war that has already killed at least 7 American service members, toppled one of the world's most powerful theocrats, and come dangerously close to strangling 20% of the world's entire oil supply. But here is the thing that is going to stay with you long after this video ends. There is one piece of this story that almost every major news network buried in paragraph 8 of their coverage. A revelation confirmed by the Washington Post, CNN, Reuters, and the New York Times, all 4 independently, that fundamentally changes who this war is actually being fought against. I'm going to tell you exactly what that is. But to understand why it matters, you need to understand how we got here. Because the United States did not wake up on February 28, 2026, and decide to go to war with Iran. This has been building for decades. And the final countdown to what the Pentagon officially named Operation Epic Fury was set in motion by a decision made 8 months earlier in the dead of night above the skies of Tehran. Welcome to the channel. I am going to walk you through the complete story of why the United States attacked Iran, what has happened in the 9 days since those first strikes, and what this means for you personally, your gas prices, your economy, and the very real question of whether this war is about to get a whole lot bigger. By the end of this video, you will understand the real reason these strikes happen now and not 2 years ago. What Iran did that sent shockwaves through every energy market on the planet, why Russia is quietly embedded in the middle of this conflict, and what the 3 most realistic ways this war ends actually look like. If you have not subscribed yet, do it now. This is the most consequential geopolitical story of the decade, and we are tracking every development as it happens. Let us start with the backstory, because to understand February 28, 2026, you need to go back to 2018. That is when the United States, under President Trump's first term, pulled out of the Iran nuclear deal, formerly called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. That agreement, which had taken years of painstaking diplomacy to build, placed hard limits on Iran's ability to enrich uranium. It slowed the nuclear program down significantly. When the U.S. walked away from it, Iran started enriching again. Slowly at first, then faster and faster. And by mid-2025, according to CBS News, Iran had stockpiled around 972 pounds of uranium enriched up to 60% purity. Here is why that number matters so much. Think of uranium enrichment like climbing a staircase toward a nuclear weapon. 3% enrichment is what you put inside a civilian power plant. 20% is the threshold where the international community starts getting genuinely alarmed. 60% is 3/4 of the way up that staircase to weapons-grade material, which begins at 90%. Iran was standing on that staircase 3/4 of the way up and telling the entire world it had every right to be there. So in June of 2025, President Trump made a decision that surprised a lot of people. He launched Operation Midnight Hammer. According to a Pentagon briefing reported in detail by CBS News and the New York Times, on the night of June 21, 2025, the United States sent 7 B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, over 125 total aircraft, a guided missile submarine, and approximately 75 precision-guided weapons directly at Iran's most sensitive nuclear facilities. The 3 targets were Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Fordow is buried inside a mountain. It was specifically engineered to survive conventional airstrikes. To crack it, the U.S. deployed the GBU-57 Massive Ordnance Penetrator, a 30,000-pound bunker-busting bomb that is, to this day, the most powerful non-nuclear weapon in the American arsenal. 14 of them were dropped. According to USNI News, it was the largest B-2 Spirit bomber strike in American history. Trump declared to the world that Iran's nuclear program had been, and I am quoting directly here, obliterated. But here is where it gets interesting. Because it had not been. Iran kept enriching. The facilities were damaged, severely in some cases, but the program did not die. Iran's scientists relocated equipment, rebuilt where they could, and continued. And this is the part most mainstream coverage glossed over. The June 2025 strikes did not end the threat they were meant to end. They damaged it. And that distinction matters enormously for understanding everything that came next. So through the second half of 2025, the Trump administration tried a different approach: negotiation. According to the detailed Wikipedia account of the 2025 to 2026 Iran-United States negotiations, Trump sent envoys and at one point gave Iran a 60-day deadline to reach a comprehensive deal. When that deadline passed without an agreement, another round of talks began. By early February 2026, those talks were barely alive. On February 19, according to Reuters, Trump publicly issued a new ultimatum. Iran had 10 to 15 days to make a deal or face what the president described as bad things. Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi went on record responding to that ultimatum. According to CNN, he wrote publicly, quote, "Curious to know why we do not capitulate, because we are Iranian." The nuclear deal talks formally collapsed on February 26 and 27, 2026, according to The Guardian. 2 days later, the bombs fell. That is what led to the morning of February 28. But what happened in those first 12 hours, and what Iran did in direct response, is the core of this story. And one of those things had not been done by any country in over 40 years. That is coming up right now. On the morning of February 28, 2026, the United States and Israel launched what Britannica describes as nearly 900 strikes in just 12 hours. The Pentagon officially named it Operation Epic Fury. According to the White House statement published the same day, the operation targeted Iran's missile infrastructure, its air defense networks, its military command structure, and its senior leadership. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, flying fortresses that are essentially invisible to radar, dropped 2,000-pound bunker-busting penetrator bombs on deeply buried Iranian missile launchers and storage facilities, according to Army recognition and the war zone. Over the following 8 days, according to Al Jazeera's tracking of U.S. Central Command statements, American and Israeli forces struck more than 3,000 targets inside Iran and destroyed 43 major military and nuclear facilities. But the single most significant event of day one was not a facility. It was a man. Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, who had ruled Iran since 1989, longer than most people watching this video have been alive, was killed on February 28 in Israeli precision airstrikes around Tehran. According to Wikipedia's account of the assassination, Israeli strikes targeted locations connected to his security apparatus as part of the coordinated opening wave of Operation Epic Fury. He did not survive day one. Now you might be thinking, if they killed the man running the country, doesn't that end the war? Think about it this way. Imagine someone cuts off the head of an organization that has spent 47 years, since the Islamic Revolution of 1979, preparing ideologically, militarily, and spiritually for a confrontation with what it calls the Great Satan, an organization whose entire identity is built around resistance and martyrdom. What you get when you cut off that head is not surrender. What you get is exactly what the name of the operation predicted: fury. Iran's military launched an immediate and wide-reaching retaliation, not just against Israel, against American military assets scattered across the entire Gulf region. According to Al Jazeera and NPR, Iranian ballistic missiles and drones targeted U.S. positions in Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Iraq, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Azerbaijan, and Oman. On March 2, 2026, 6 U.S. service members were killed in a drone strike on the Shuaiba port facility in Kuwait. According to the Washington Post, which obtained and analyzed imagery of the attack, those troops had very little physical protection from the incoming drone. The Pentagon confirmed the identities. According to AP News, 4 of the 6 were members of the Army Reserve. As of March 8, 2026, a 7th American service member had died from wounds he sustained in a separate Iranian attack in Saudi Arabia, per CNN and CBS News. As of day 9, Wikipedia's running casualty count places the total American military deaths at 8. Let that number sit for a second. 8 Americans dead in 9 days. These are not abstract statistics. These are people in their 20s and 30s who were stationed in the Gulf doing a job, and who are now coming home in flag-draped caskets. President Trump attended the dignified transfer ceremony at Dover Air Force Base alongside the families. And this is where the story crosses directly into your daily life, because Iran did not stop at military targets. What Iran did to the global energy system is the thing that had not been done by any country in more than 40 years, and it is the thing that is already costing you money right now. The Strait of Hormuz is a narrow waterway at its tightest point, just 21 miles wide, sitting between Iran and Oman at the mouth of the Persian Gulf. According to the BBC and CNBC, roughly 20% of the entire world's oil supply flows through that strait every single day. About 20% of global liquefied natural gas as well. When a senior Iranian military official publicly threatened to, quote, set on fire any ship attempting to transit the Strait of Hormuz, according to the Los Angeles Times and the New York Times, tanker traffic did not just slow down, it effectively stopped. Captains refused to sail through. Insurance companies pulled coverage, ships anchored and waited. And when 20% of the world's oil stops moving, markets panic. According to CNBC and Yahoo Finance, U.S. crude oil, West Texas Intermediate, surged 63% in a single week. That is a number so large it barely looks real. It is the biggest weekly gain in the entire history of the WTI futures contract, which dates back to 1983. Bigger than any week during the Gulf War. Bigger than the week of September 11th. Bigger than the Arab oil embargo of the 1970s. WTI settled at around $90 per barrel. Brent crude, the international pricing benchmark, topped 94 per barrel for a weekly gain of roughly 28 to 30% per Bloomberg and CNBC. Here is what that means for you directly. Analysts cited by ABC 13 Houston and NBC News have warned that if this conflict escalates further, specifically, if the Strait of Hormuz closure becomes prolonged, crude oil could reach between $100 and $130 per barrel. At that level, U.S. gas prices could hit between $4.50 and $6 US per gallon. According to NBC News, the Iran war is already threatening to undermine Trump's own domestic affordability agenda and complicate Federal Reserve decisions on interest rates. This is not a foreign conflict happening to people you do not know. This war is already at your gas station. And if it deepens, it will show up in your grocery bill, your electricity rates, and the interest on anything you are borrowing money to buy. Now, the surface narrative on this conflict goes something like this. The U.S. bombed Iran to stop a nuclear threat. Iran retaliated and hit American troops, oil prices spiked, everybody is waiting to see what happens next. That narrative is not wrong, but it is seriously incomplete. And this is where we get to the thing I told you about at the very start of this video, the detail buried in paragraph 8, the revelation that changes who this war is actually being fought against. On March 6, 2026, just 6 days into Operation Epic Fury, the Washington Post broke a story that sent a chill through every defense analyst in Washington. Based on 4 officials with direct knowledge, the Post reported that Russia is providing Iran with targeting intelligence, not moral support, not diplomatic cover. Targeting intelligence, meaning Russia is telling Iran where U.S. warships are, where U.S. aircraft are, where American troops are moving. CNN confirmed the same reporting independently. Reuters confirmed it. The New York Times confirmed it, adding that Russia has provided satellite imagery showing the positions of U.S. Navy assets in the region. According to CNN, the intelligence package from Russia includes the locations and movements of American troops, ships, and aircraft. Stop and really let that land. Russia, a nuclear-armed superpower that the United States is already in indirect conflict with over Ukraine, is actively feeding targeting data to a country that is trying to kill American service members. The Washington Post described this as, quote, the first indication that another major U.S. adversary has sought to get involved in this war. The Trump administration publicly downplayed the reports, but 4 independent sources across 4 separate credible news organizations confirmed it. Here is what I want you to understand about why this changes everything. This is no longer a bilateral conflict between the United States and Iran. What we are watching is the early shape of a wider confrontation. America and Israel on one side, Iran with Russian intelligence support on the other. And a war in which Russia is actively feeding information to help aim missiles at American personnel is not a contained regional conflict. It is something qualitatively different. It is a proxy war in which the proxy is shooting back with targeting data provided by a nuclear-armed adversary. And if the United States ever chooses to respond to Russia's involvement directly, even in a limited way, this conversation changes completely. And then, as if the Russia revelation was not enough to absorb, something happened in Tehran that closed one door and opened a darker one. Iran's Assembly of Experts, the clerical body constitutionally responsible for selecting the supreme leader, moved with remarkable speed. On March 9, 2026, according to Al Jazeera and Reuters, they named Mojtaba Khamenei as Iran's new supreme leader. Mojtaba is the son of Ali Khamenei, the man killed on day one. He is described by Reuters and multiple analysts as a hardliner. His very first act as supreme leader will be to inherit a country under active bombardment, with its military battered and its people in crisis. And, according to Reuters, Trump's response to Mojtaba's appointment was to reject any settlement of the war and raise the prospect, his explicit words, of killing all of Iran's potential leaders. Think carefully about that sequence. The U.S. killed the supreme leader on day one, presumably hoping that removing him might create space for a more pragmatic government to step forward and talk. Instead, the Iranians appointed his ideologically aligned son within 10 days. And now the American president is talking about targeting that successor too. This is not the trajectory of a war heading toward a negotiated exit. So let us talk honestly about where this goes. 3 scenarios. The best case, the most likely, and the one nobody wants to say out loud. The best case is a rapid ceasefire followed by serious negotiations. Iran, internally destabilized by the killing of its supreme leader and the systematic destruction of its military infrastructure, finds that its new leadership has no choice but to seek a deal. A comprehensive nuclear agreement is reached with strict international verification. The Strait of Hormuz reopens. Oil markets stabilize. The war ends in weeks. The Guardian identified this path as a genuine possibility. But look at the conditions required for it. Iran would need a pragmatic new leader willing to negotiate under fire. Trump would need to accept something short of unconditional surrender. And Russia would need to stop feeding intelligence that encourages continued resistance. Right now, none of those 3 conditions are present. The most likely scenario, according to analysis from the Brookings Institution and the Century Foundation, is a prolonged air campaign with no clear endpoint. The U.S. and Israel continue systematic strikes on Iranian military, missile, and nuclear infrastructure. Iran continues what military strategists call asymmetric retaliation, drone and missile attacks on Gulf bases, activating Hezbollah in Lebanon, mobilizing militia networks in Iraq, energizing Houthi forces in Yemen, and continuing to squeeze the Strait of Hormuz. More American service members will be at risk. Oil prices remain elevated. The U.S. economy absorbs an extended energy shock. And the question of what victory even looks like becomes harder and harder to answer with each passing week. The worst case is the scenario that analysts at the Stimson Center and The Guardian describe as unlikely but no longer dismissible. Pushed to the wall, with its conventional military degrading and its leadership decapitated, Iran either disperses and accelerates a covert nuclear weapons program from facilities that were never publicly known, or the Iranian state itself fractures into internal conflict and civil war. A destabilized Iran is not a defanged Iran. It is an Iran where weapons, materials, and armed factions operate outside any central authority, scattering beyond anyone's ability to track or contain. It is also a vacuum into which Russia and China would almost certainly attempt to project influence, competing for control over a country of 90 million people sitting on the world's second-largest natural gas reserves. That is the scenario that keeps defense planners awake. Here is specifically what to watch in the coming days and weeks. Watch the Strait of Hormuz. If tanker traffic begins to resume, that is a meaningful signal that Iran is pulling back from its most economically destructive card. Watch the first public statements from Mojtaba Khamenei as supreme leader, specifically whether he signals any room for diplomacy or whether he doubles down on the language of resistance and martyrdom. Watch Russia. Any escalation in the nature or scale of Russian intelligence support, or any indication of Russian military assets moving toward the theater, is the most dangerous signal this conflict could send. And watch the U.S. Congress. According to the Century Foundation, the war was easy to start and there is no clear plan for how it ends. Congressional pressure on the White House to define an exit strategy may be the most underreported story of the weeks ahead. Let me bring this full circle, because I told you at the beginning of this video that there was a buried detail that changes who this war is actually being fought against. That detail was Russia. And here is the final layer of why it matters beyond the immediate tactical picture. If Russia is providing Iran with targeting data to help kill Americans, and if the United States at some point decides it cannot ignore that without responding, we are no longer discussing the Iran war in isolation. We are discussing a confrontation between the two largest nuclear arsenals on Earth. That is not a reason to panic. Nuclear-armed countries have navigated proxy conflicts before without going to direct war. But it is a reason to be clear-eyed, to pay attention, and to reject the comfortable idea that what is happening 9 time zones away has nothing to do with your life. Here is the one thing I want you to take away from everything we covered today. This war did not begin on February 28, 2026. It began years ago, in slow motion, through a nuclear program that neither diplomacy nor military strikes ever fully stopped. Operation Midnight Hammer in June 2025 did not end it. A 15-day Trump ultimatum in February 2026 did not end it. And Operation Epic Fury, as devastating as it has been, may not end it either, not without a political solution running alongside the military campaign. Because the historical record from Vietnam to Iraq to Afghanistan is unambiguous on one point, the United States has never successfully concluded a major Middle East conflict through air power alone. I want to hear your honest read in the comments. Do you think there is a realistic path to a negotiated end to this war? Or do you think we are looking at something longer and more dangerous? Tell me below. I read every comment on these videos. If this breakdown gave you something real to think about, please subscribe. We are covering every major development in this conflict as it happens, and the next video is already in production. It is going to answer what I think is actually the most important question right now. Who exactly is Mojtaba Khamenei, the man who just became Iran's new supreme leader, and what does everything we know about him tell us about where Iran goes from here? That video is coming very soon. Stay informed. Stay sharp, and I will see you in the next one.